Hello, this is Ruth Elizabeth Hancock from Work Your Energy podcast. This week, I'm excited to introduce Ilana Moore, who is a geomancer and the author of 10 books on related subjects, things like the fairy haunts, the Stone Age, farming. And in particular, I'm going to be talking to her today about her Fairy Haunts of Ireland book, which is her latest book. And it's a really beautiful, uplifting book and full of a lot of information around the ancient sites and the spiritual heritage of Ireland. So, hi, Ilana. How are you? Thanks for
Hi,
joining me.
Ruth. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
It's so great to have you. The first question I wanted to ask you is, what is geomancy?
Ah, yes, this is a question that many people do ask me because they
Yeah.
haven't heard of it. But geo of the earth, so a person who is concerned about things of the earth, in this case, the invisible energies of the earth and how they affect us, affect our well-being, our prosperity, etc. And and then navigating between the areas that are not healthy for us and living in places that are healthy. So
Okay.
it works on a small scale with people wanting to know what are the energies in the household, to bigger scale, what is the um, influences in the whole landscape, what are some of the mythic layers of energy in the landscape, etc., which I've always
Okay.
found fascinating, and it's a constant discovery of amazing stuff.
Yeah, I find it fascinating as well. So when you're talking about this, are we talking sort of about the consciousness of different parts of the planet, and the energy ley lines of the land? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, yeah, interesting you mentioned consciousness because a lot of people would say that energy lines and points and fields of energy, that as a dowser, or diviner, I find these things. But a lot of people have said in the past, well, actually, there's a component of these energies which does exhibit consciousness, that there is a mind behind within these things. Just as
Yeah.
we humans have layers of different energies that have different functions, and our mind is one of those different frequencies or energies, so it is in the landscape. So, as I said, yeah, there's lines of energy. Some of them come out of the up from under the earth and come across the land and curve around. These might be called the serpent lines because they have that shape and they sort of flow like a snake might move in a curving fashion. And then they might earth themselves at an energy point, a vortex, or they come up in the form that we douse as a vortex and go down back into the earth as a vortex. So these are examples of some of the lines and points that can be found. But just in relation to the ley lines, as you mentioned them, um, from a just to be a nitpicker, the ley lines themselves are actually straight line energy lines, and they're associated with above the ground um, energy activity because you could say they're a yang form of energy, whereas the serpentine or dragon lines on the ground are more a yin form of energy. So they have a curving form. The ley lines have a straight form. So there is a fundamental difference between those two sorts of energy. Um, the more yang energies are up in the sky, you have grids, and then you have these ley lines or energy layers is what the some of the dowsing societies tried to define some of these terms, because there is a lot of confusion. Some people would say ley line, but they're talking about this, that, and the other line. So if we need to be specific and clear, we have to find out, well, where are those energy lines that they're talking about? Are they on the ground, up in the sky? And originally the term ley referred to an alignment, and this was a discovery by a guy in Herefordshire in UK. And he saw that the sacred sites seemed to have alignments between them. So you could put a ruler on a map and you could see these sites lining up. Well, if you do have a lot of sites, actually you can make a few line up anyway. It doesn't mean there's an energy line connecting them. It might be you're just thinking that. And energy follows thought. So after Watkins discovered these things, Dowsers came along and said, well, actually, we're picking up on energy connections, lines of energy between these sacred sites. So there could be churches, could be standing stone, but they're always related to human activity in this context. So the ley lines themselves, so it's a kind of controversial subject because people are not clear about what definition they're using. So it could refer to an alignment between places, and then the people who are interested in the consciousness, as I am, they'll say, well, these are energy lines or alignments that are associated with places of human gathering and focal points in the human landscape. Whereas I'm from Australia, and so if I look at the landscape in Australia, I don't find that historical sort of connection. Ley lines or energy leys, as I might call them, I would find on mountaintops, which are yang features of the landscape, and they might go from mountaintop to mountaintop. In other words, there's sort of a wilder, more natural version of this phenomena. So,
okay, so can you see these lines, or do you use your dowsing rod to find them?
well, some people can see energy lines, and sometimes I get a sense of it in my mind's eye. But usually I'll be dowsing with my dowsing tool, my pendulum, or my hands or my eyes. I just use my body usually. And
You've been doing it for 40 years, haven't you?
40
So
years, yeah. So, but
yeah,
you get a feeling for them because dowsing is a feeling sense. You're picking up feelings, and you might sense an intense energy, and then the dowsing is a good way of sort of pinpointing where it is. And then, of course, from the geomancer or a geobiologist is a sort of scientific version of the geomancer name, concerned with the geobiology of the ground, so how the earth is affecting our health. They will be looking at some of the the health consequences. So if you do find, I mean, just simply speaking, if you find a very strong energy of any kind where you're sleeping, that is not a good place to sleep. So try and move the bed. Yeah, so the energies that might be considered sacred in one context of a sacred site where everybody goes, it might be a church or whatever, once a week or whatever. I mean, that builds up that energy to create the sacred site. It's a mixture of our energy and earth energy and angels or whatever. It's always a mixture of historical energies. But I can't remember where I was going then.
yeah. So let's just pull back into the serpent. So serpent lines. So this is something that I've sort of felt this myself, with all the research that I do in these areas. But I wanted to ask you, does that differ to dragons? Are they something different, or are they part of the serpent lines that we can see?
Well, dragons love to travel on dragon lines.
Yeah. So they call them dragon lines in China, don't they? Is it the same thing as
the Long May would translate as dragon lines. Yeah. So even in Australia, I had a pair of dragons that lived in the hill in the back of my little farm, and they used to travel up a dragon line occasionally up to Aboriginal women's sacred site, which was a very beautiful rocky outcrop on the top of the hill above my house. And they used to travel up and down and bring the volcanic energy from the back hill, it was a lava flow, and bring it up to the women's site. and it was very
So there,
powerful.
okay, so there, I remember you saying that there were little fairies that help to open the buds of the flowers. And when you sort of describe that, it's sort of, I don't know, I started to just see in my mind, all these different interdimensional entities,
Yes.
such as dragons,
Yeah.
working with consciousness to, to help this world grow and evolve and, and sort of move forward, if you like. Is that how you see them?
Yeah, well, yes, but there's so many different ones with different functions. Yeah, but the dragons, they say the dragon lines themselves are bringing up the powerful earth energies up from under the ground and spreading them around the landscape. So they're an energizing thing. They're a very yang energizing energy. But then you always get pairs of them. So I had a male and female one, so yin and yang, and that you could say that was their function, was an energizing function. But but
Okay.
they just live there. I mean, they have their lives to live. And on that farm, I had to build the house. And when you're doing physical work every day, you tend to not do a lot of sort of spiritual work. So I hadn't bothered going out with my pendulum because I needed to build a house type of thing. And those dragons came to me in my dreams, and I saw in my
Mm.
dream several dreams that there was a pair of doors on the hillside, and that I had this feeling in the dream that something was about to happen. So I hid and I watched as the doors opened and the dragons came out and sort of flew up the dragon line. And it was pretty awesome in the dream to see that. And of course, then I did take my pendulum out to that very spot afterwards when I was awake. And sure enough, there was the portal where they would be coming out of the hill.
Mm.
Yeah, so they sometimes they come and find you.
Yes, well,
What they
certainly
look
through the
for them.
dreams.
Yeah,
It's easier for them to find us through the dreams, isn't it?
I
Rather
think
than
so. Yeah,
rather than in the physical world where we're all busy
yeah,
doing something else.
yeah. We're always busy, so doing
Yeah, I know.
something else. And
Yeah.
it's usually when I see or become aware of these beings is usually when I'm doing nothing and my mind is
Yes.
pretty blank. Now, most people do not aspire to do nothing, but for me,
Mm.
it's pure luxury. And anyone who's got little kids, it would be super luxury just to do
Yeah.
nothing. So I can go and sit on my riverbank just around the corner from me is a beautiful river, and I just go and stare at the river, and it's doing nothing, but things happen when I'm there in the spirit
Mm.
world. Yeah.
Yeah, so that brings me on to this question I wanted to ask you is do you think that our ancestors used to be able to see these different dimensions, see these interdimensional beings, which I believe are in other dimensions? And I know in your Fairy Haunts book you talk about 12 dimensions, and of course we've got string theory and M theory, which are 10 and 11 dimensions. So it's fairly obvious, I think, these days that we're living in a multidimensional world. But do you think that maybe our ancestors could actually see these interdimensional beings, and that's what then became our myths and legends?
Well, it's a complicated question because politics and propaganda got in the way. So the history that's been written down is warped. However, it's not just a matter of ancestors who, yes, could see them, but people today, the Australian Aboriginals, they still see them. But it all depends on your lifestyle. If you fill your mind up with crap, you won't be able to see stuff. That's why I haven't had a TV for about 10 years. I find I get very impacted by visual images on screens.
Yeah.
I don't mind a bit of radio or looking at the news, but I don't really want to see stuff because it just fills up your mind so that you don't have the availability to see things. But it's fairly obvious if you're an Aboriginal person. And this is where I was coming from. I went to school with Aboriginal kids, which sounds strange. I was in Sydney, but I was right on the edge of Sydney and where there was an Aboriginal reserve. And so I went to that school. So I think they didn't have so much clutter in their minds, our ancestors. And so the spirit world, they were a lot closer to it because of the less clutter in the mind.
Mm.
And I mean, it's amazing when you look at the recorded folklore of Ireland, which was collected in the 1930s. So it was nearly a century ago, and they were so many stories of fairy encounters. So when people say, "Oh, fairy story," well, most of what was written in Ireland, they weren't just stories; they were actual events that were written. They were fairy events. Yeah, they
Mm.
weren't myths. Like people think myth means, oh, that's a story that a culture created. Um, but for instance, the nature spirits in Aboriginal Australia, all they don't look like people. Usually, they look like animals.
Mm.
They look more like the what would have been the most important animal in that landscape. The top predator or whatever before the humans came along. Because my understanding of nature spirits and what they look like to us is that they can look like anything they want, but they aspired to the abilities of the physical dimensions of the beings that were physical, because certain things they can't do. They can have an influence, but they can't physically change anything easily. And they'd always look up to the a highly evolved animal form. And that's probably why, for instance, when I was in Malaysia with my friends there, where I occasionally teach all of this, they take me to special places, and I'd be looking around to see what would the nature spirits look like. And we went to a beautiful waterfall in the jungle once, and there was a huge water spirit under the waterfall. And I was so surprised because it looked like an orangutan. An orangutan would have been the top animal in the forest, because people tend to not live in the rainforest. It's a bit dense, live near it. And here was a water spirit that looked like an orangutan. It was very bizarre.
Mm.
But then if you have that understanding, then you can understand it. Yeah.
Yes, I like the way you talk about how astral matter can create any form.
Yes.
And certainly, when I'm doing intuitive work, I do find that the form that's often created, and this is the mind sight, is a form that is recognizable or understandable or comprehensible. It's and as you say, the form that was created in Malaysia was the orangutan, which is in that part of the forest where it was, the jungle where it was. And then possibly that's how they can also look like little tiny mini humans as well, because maybe
Yes.
that's the top predator in that part of the place as well. And I would imagine it's easier for them to create an astral matter form that already exists rather
Yeah,
than create something completely new.
it's true. And they also have the ability to pluck images out of our minds. So if they want to communicate with us, they have to appear in a form that we can recognize them. So,
Yes.
often they don't want to talk to us, they have no interest in us. But there may be a reason why they are interested, and then they will make themselves known or recognized. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's fascinating because you refer to so many different stories around fairies in Ireland that I'm on the same wavelength as you really, and I feel that these can't be mythical stories. Our ancestors didn't sit around all day writing stories about, creatures that they just made up. They had
Yes.
better things to do. So it just seems to be there's just too many stories, and so these must have been as you say, beings and entities that we could see at some point in the past, before our world was hijacked and altered, by the church, and then it's, by film and TV and whatever it is. It's all hijacking our collective consciousness. But consciousness can create any form, as you're saying, using astral matter. So
Yes.
these are forms that also were created as well. So I like the way that you categorize your fairies, or what we term fairies, into gnomes, leprechauns, the little people, the good people, gods and goddesses. And these are the categorizations that you've created based on the different stories and how
Oh,
these
not
stories
me.
come across.
No, that
Yeah, no,
wasn't me. That was something I got from a book, and I'm only referring to the Irish situation because it would be impossible or a very, very big book to write about the fairies of the world. The fairies, as I've called them, that is just, I've used that as a code word for the nature spirits. And these were the ones that you've just listed were the ones that the Irish people wrote about or talked about because they had an oral folk story tradition. They didn't really write them down much.
so one of the things that I'm discovering with my own research is that there's quite a lot of different skeletal remains that are being discovered around the world. You know, we've got the elongated skull people, and we've also got the little, so like they're 4 foot high, you know, so they're not that small by any means, but they also have elongated skulls, and they have the shape of their ear hole is further back, indicating that may have held a pointed ear.
There's physical remains and they're not fairies because fairies live in the spirit world only.
Okay, all right. Well, that's interesting. So then we would never be able to have their skeletal remains.
No,
Okay. So they're living in another dimension to us, but we can see them and we see them as light,
feel
or
them, yes.
can we touch them?
Sometimes I'll make an appointment with the nature spirits and take a group to meet them if they're friendly to find out first. And especially the water spirits are often very friendly, and sometimes they'll come over and their energy field will touch our field. But I always ask permission. They don't do it if they don't want to because they don't really like our energy. But if they know that we're all genuine and friendly, etc., and then it's very nice to touch the edge of their field, and or even they'll envelop us in their field of energy, and it'll just be a beautiful experience. Yeah.
Okay. And how does this feel, or how do your participants describe it feeling?
Well, I'd say English is not well equipped to describe the words necessary for that.
Okay. All right. So it's a magical sort of
Feeling, and I've taken people to introduce them to little fairies in gardens, and it was quite a privilege for me to see the tears rolling down the cheeks of the men who were meeting the fairies. Experience for me and for them.
So maybe there's a healing element to that as well. If it's, I always see crying as the body releasing trapped energy, you know,
Yeah,
trying to heal itself.
maybe.
I would imagine that because I do believe that humans, because I think we're multidimensional, and I think that we used to have many more of these abilities in the past, and certainly self-healing is one of our innate abilities. And I think that they probably can still do all the things that we can no longer do. I mean, we're all made of consciousness. We are all the one mind, and everything is consciousness. So we're all sort of part of the same field. I always think of it.
Yes, well, that's the new way of looking at the whole field of dowsing that I've been involved with for 40 years. Because when I got involved, it was just about finding lines and points of energy, and that was a bit boring. It was like, well, where do the lines take you to? Maybe a special place. What happens at that place? That was what I was more interested in. And then the whole idea of consciousness infusing everything, it just brought a whole new amazing universe of treasure to discover.
Yeah, I can understand that because consciousness, I can see as it's a way to communicate. So we can communicate through consciousness because consciousness is everything, but we can also bend consciousness. And I think that's sort of the science behind manifestation and creation and these sorts of things as well.
Yeah.
And, all of these abilities, these natural abilities that we have, I think would have just all been suppressed in us for such a long time. We've forgotten all of this.
And also we get opinionated about what's happening, that we think it's one thing but maybe it's another thing. We probably underestimate the role of nature spirits and angels helping us. If I find a place that's haunted by a spirit that shouldn't be there, usually I'll get some impression of what's wrong with it. Usually there's some healing needed, emotional healing. So I offer that to the spirit. But then I call on the angels. And before I know it, woof, they've gone off into another dimension and all is good. Also, another example would be there are places like holy wells that people go and famously get cured, like Lourdes or somewhere. What those people don't realize is that those sorts of places are full of little spirits that love to do healing work, or there might be big spirits, or there might be angels, and it could well be through that aspect of the consciousness of the place, or the conscious entities of the place that are actually doing the healing, not just touching the rock or whatever, other beings that are actually helping us in those locations. So this is why the sacred sites are important to understand and to protect, because they've built up this very often healing energy. We can destroy that quite easily, especially when archaeologists come in and rebuild things with steel and concrete and change the whole energetic fabric of the structure.
Well, yes, and I think that's orchestrated too. I mean, one of the things that, we know that we have inner earth water that comes from the earth and not from the rain. It's not part of the rain cycle. Yeah. And this has always been a healing water, and it's what people used for centuries, probably millennia, to heal their bodies, as you rightly say. And many of these inner earth healing waters have actually been blocked up by the army. So the military in the States, the army in England, deemed to be unsafe. But again, I think, it's all orchestrated. It's all pushing us, more and more into the pharmaceutical fake drug world, because we know that the drugs don't heal us. They actually reduce our lifespan. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
But we can go to water places and meditate there and actually absorb the energy of the water without even drinking it. And then there are these nature spirits hanging around those places, because they actually feed off the energy of those waters. Any moving water generates a lot of energy. And that's food for nature spirits, because they have to have sustenance too.
Yes,
also,
yes.
The alien beings, I don't know what to call them best, but beings from somewhere else, they come and they mine, as I understand it, they come and absorb energies from mineral areas, mineral spring areas. And I've met a few in Australia in a mineral springs area. And I think that's probably why they were there, because of the high energy nature of the place.
Yes, I certainly feel that we get a lot of extraterrestrials coming from other dimensions, other sort of I don't know what you call them really. I mean, I think space is not what we think it is, so I think probably dimensions is probably the best way to describe it. I think Earth is very, very different. I think it's much more magical than we've been led to believe. I think it's probably much bigger than we've been led to believe. And I can see that they're coming here for a variety of different reasons. And I find it unbelievable that we just don't know this. But as we were saying at the beginning of the conversation, we are so, physically busy and exhausted. We just don't see anything around us anymore. We're all tunneled into the film and TV and the video games, and we just don't get that sense, that understanding of how multidimensional our world is.
Yes. No, you really have to empty your mind first. And the practice of meditation, of course, is fantastic for that. I mean, there was only one occasion where I actually physically saw the extraterrestrial and my husband at the same time, and we stopped and we filmed it. And that was in Ireland. The place where we're at looked completely different to when I went back there years later. I thought there was walls around. I thought there was a sports ground with big lights shining, and they were shining onto the road and almost blinding us. And this was at night when we were driving through a village. But when I went back years later, there was no walls. There was just houses. So this light detached from the light pole and followed the car. And so we pulled off the road, and I just happened to have a film camera in the back seat. And we filmed this light watching us as we watched it, and I got a very good look at it. It wasn't just a light, and I just felt humbled and full of joy that I was seeing a different life form. I was so amazed and blown away. What I saw was a membrane that was pulsing with a light, a dancing flame in the middle of it. I think people have seen these things on the ocean. They call them lanterns or something. But it was watching us, and it seemed okay, friendly enough. And then it zoomed off at, a huge speed, just went whoosh off into the distance after we'd all had a good look. But when I looked at the film footage, all you could see was the light. You couldn't see this being. It looked like a jellyfish, pulsating membrane. Yeah, I was like, oh, finally I've seen one. And Peter saw it too, because he wouldn't normally see spirits. But yeah.
That's very interesting. And I think we forget this, don't we? We forget that most extraterrestrial beings are, loving and just pure light. As you say, to just be, they exude pure love, I feel. And we always focus on the negative ones, of which, they're unfortunately they have been around, but they're sort of moving off a little bit. But we're surrounded by so many beautiful, loving ones.
And curious. I think that it was curious about us, and we were curious about it. So there was no malice at all. But then to come back and see that whatever was happening, our whole vision of what was outside had changed. They were able to create a sort of a smokescreen for themselves. I assumed there was some other activity going on, and it was just a watcher or something.
Well, I'm sure. I mean, that's one of the things that I'm absolutely, certain of, is that they have the ability to access advanced technology that we cannot even comprehend. We're just nowhere there. I mean, we're only just beginning to understand the world of consciousness. And I think this is something we're now going to be studying for the next, I don't know, 1,000 years or whatever, to understand truly how to work with consciousness and harness it and tap into it, in order to be able to shift the reality, because as we know, everything is just a hologram, using it to shift the hologram and create a better world for us all. So, yeah, so I just wanted to touch on some of these. So you go through in your book, your Fairy Haunts book, you go through the different counties and you look at all the different spirits, and this is taken from, I'm understanding, your own mind sight, your own intuitive way of working with the land, and also the stories that you've heard around in that part of the land as well. Is that correct?
Yes, I like to find out what other people have to say on the subject historically. Yeah, if anything, because traditionally in Ireland it was a taboo subject. I was talking about fairies with a woman here recently, and she said, "Oh, when I was young, it wasn't polite to talk about them." So yeah, in the past they wouldn't be writing down the stories, but they did collect them in the Folklore Commission. They got the school kids to go out in the 1930s to collect all the stories, and a lot of
Oh,
them.
yes.
Some of
So
those.
let the sun goddesses, because the sun is something that comes up in so many different, in so many different cultures. Is very, very prominent in Egyptian culture.
Where it's
And
seen, the negative side of it is stronger in Egypt because of heat, heat waves, heat stroke, very, too much sun. And so
yeah.
it was a bit scary, the sun goddess there. Whereas the sun goddess in Ireland is very welcome because it's a very dull place. So today is dull and yesterday was dull. And you can understand worshipping the sun at all. It's quite an obvious thing. But see, a lot of these new age type of publications will have this very monoculture view and say, oh, the sun was a god, the moon was a goddess. Yeah, well, maybe in some cultures, but I think most European cultures, the sun was a goddess, not a god. Ultimately connected with agriculture. And so the agriculture goddess was also very important too.
So you think it was human activity that created the collective consciousness that then led to the sun goddess? Or was it that there was that the sun goddess was actually related to an interdimensional entity that was part of that land and maybe used to show themselves, as the sun, or maybe was strongly linked to the sun, and then they were worshipping that entity? Or was it simply a case of that they were worshipping the sun because they needed sun to be able to grow the plants?
Well, a mixture of all the above, I would say. You see, a lot of the goddesses that came into Ireland were the god and goddess of each tribe that came. So the Belgic tribes all spoke the Celtic language. So they might have been a different tribe. They might have had a different deity or tribe, but they did speak the same language. And so there's a huge mixture of gods and goddesses here. But some of them were evolved from nature spirits, other ones probably from the spirit of the sun. and the perception of the spirit of the sun. I don't know, there's no records about it. It goes back many millennia. And but when you go back into the ancient past, you do find a lot of similarities, like the serpent gods. And just doing the research now of a very little known ram-headed serpent god called Segamo, and he was the god of the Manapi tribe, who was the Isle of Man is named after the Manapis, and they had seaports all around Ireland, and they came from Holland around there. And I suspect the fact that some of these tribes that St. Patrick came up against were worshippers of this serpent god, and that's why they created the propaganda that he got rid of the serpent, because that represented their main deity. So, yeah, there are many things to many people. But as I said in my book, and it might upset some people, a lot of them are glorified nature spirits. And actually, the glorified bit, they talk about that in the Bible, the glorified whoever. It's because we give them our energy, and that boosts their energy. And I think I wrote about that in my fairy book, about how I observed the evolution of a powerful landscape spirit on the Aboriginal women's site where my farm was. And she was sort of asleep when I met her. And then I was giving her my energy. And she grew bigger and bigger, and she took on the form not of an Aboriginal, not of an animal. No, she took on the form of Kuan Yin. And it's because I had a statue of Kuan Yin that was gifted to me, a very, very special one. And we were all admiring it. And she probably got jealous, because they do. They get jealous. The gods and goddesses are jealous of each other. I've seen this. I've seen them being jealous. I've met a very jealous goddess, Rose Smyrta, the great provider. And her symbol is a big wooden ladle for stirring the magic pot. And she creates life and regenerates life. And so she lives up the hill from where my son lives, in Zurich, in Switzerland. And when I met her, I wasn't looking for her or anything, but I was connecting to a spirit of a spring, a little, what was man-made spring water put into a granite basin, channeled into it. And so I'm meeting this water spirit, and suddenly this giant female spirit comes and is really grumpy and tells me, no, I'm the top spirit, not her. Don't listen to her. Like, I'm me, don't forget me. And then she stormed off. And I thought, who the hell was that? And later I researched online, and the spoon was the key, big wooden spoon. And what I saw was exactly what I saw depicted in statues of Rose Smyrta, this goddess from the Rhinelands, where the Celtic tribes came from, that ended up in Britain and Ireland. And so the last time I was in Zurich visiting the grandson and son, she blessed me with her wooden spoon. So I got a blessing from the big wooden spoon. And I try not to have preconceived ideas. I wasn't expecting to meet the local great goddess, but she was the fractal of this goddess. So you have fractals, in other words, individual forms that inhabit a similar environment. So there might be all mountain gods or river gods or whatever. And they're all still out there, but they crave attention, because that's food for them. And that's why she was jealous, because I was giving my attention to the other one. So this is why there's stories in the Greek myths, and they're all, fighting and jealous. And actually, they have copied human behavior. This is why I say they're glorified nature spirits, but they've taken on characteristics of what humans get up to, i.e. jealousy, craving supremacy, whatever.
Okay. So the moral of the story is that we shouldn't be worshipping anybody, any deity or anything or anybody. I'm very big on we should be worshipping ourselves as, as a sovereign being and part of this galactic multiverse that we live in. And then I suppose these interdimensional, well, what you're talking about here, in fact, is spirits that maybe they're following human consciousness because they followed from the Rhineland over to Ireland, but also maybe they are entities, being spirits that do not have physical body, and in a sense, they're siphoning our energy off. So
they give back though. See, if you roll back time 2,000 years ago, you would invoke their protection. So, like the word worship is probably a bit loaded. You would invoke the protection of the goddess. So this is what in research I'm doing lately, because I'm doing a more in-depth book at the moment. I'm writing follow on from the Fairy Haunts book, that I'm finding out that some of these river goddesses are quite ferocious. And I thought, and even I found some rivers named for war gods. But then I had the realization that actually rivers were boundaries. So you would invoke the protection of the powerful spirit that was living in the river, or that you had put in the river, because these tribal spirits would follow the tribes and they'd go with them. And this was written about in New Zealand when I did research there 25 years ago for my Divining Earth Spirit book, is that the Maori used to travel around in their canoes, and they would consciously bring their special spirits with them. Be like, yeah, that water spirit, he's following our canoe to the new place. And, oh, now we have the new land here in New Zealand. Okay, we'll put this Taniwha, the most powerful water spirit, we'll put them there at the headland to protect our territory. And the chief would always be the one in charge of being friendly with these powerful water spirits that have in New Zealand case, they have the body of when somebody can see them, the body of a human and the head of a crocodile.
Yeah, so that links with all the Egyptian, the Egyptian beings with the head of the ibis and the body of a man. And I've always wondered about those.
See, in my travels around the world, not everywhere, but all around Australia and a bit of Europe and a lot of Ireland, I've seen, particularly in Australia, actually, I'm thinking, is where a lot of people from different parts of the world have gone to live. So it's super multicultural in Australia these days. And so we've met the god Pan there. I love Pan, the horned god. And he loves to get human attention, because historically they got a lot of attention from people. And you'd have to think, oh, why Pan in Australia? Yeah, because so many Greek people went to Melbourne, where we saw him in someone's backyard when I was teaching. And 6 out of the 18 people saw him or got a message of him in the class. They'd say it's the second biggest Greek city in the world. So many Greek people that went there in the 1950s. So not surprising that their gods followed them there. Yeah, so Pan is a being who Pan means everywhere. So, and also he's associated with panic because he could frighten the animals, but his name got to mean, here, there, and everywhere. So, of course, you can tap into the consciousness of something like Pan, but here was a fractal of Pan who was making himself known to 6 people in the group, which was good. And when we went out to see him, I'd already met him, and I said, well, I'm going to bring the group out to meet you. Is that okay? And, oh, yeah. And then he gave the message when we finally got out of the house to meet him. He said, oh, what kept you so long? They're craving the attention because they used to get a lot. Yeah. So, and they're very happy spirit, Pan, who's just always laughing and just really beautiful energy. And of course, got demonized by Christianity. It's so sad. So part of my role now and my mission is to deconstruct the demonization of the fairy worlds, you might say.
Well, that's a great mission. That's a really great mission, and something that's really, really needed in the world. I know we were talking about this earlier, but I think it's really important to shift all this negativity that we've had in our world ever since the Catholic Church came in and just destroyed everything. And it begs the question. I just wonder who they are sometimes, the Catholic Church, because there's no love attached to them at all. So how they got in.
I know
is
it's
just
amazing.
incredible.
It
Yeah.
might have been a form of cultural genocide. You could say that maybe some people were, yeah, sidelined or killed or something, turned into rocks. Often in the mythology, sounds like they might have got killed.
Yeah, yeah. Or actually, even using advanced technology to turn them into stone, which I honestly think that some of these myth stories, I think they are describing advanced technology, like, direct energy weapons, which we now have in the world. When you look at these ancient myths, you read it and you think, oh my God, they're talking about a nuclear bomb.
Um,
But they didn't know about that then. To them, it looked like, some weird mushroom-shaped cloud or whatever. But, to us, we now understand they're talking about this, so which I find really interesting.
yes.
Um,
Another example of relevant that's relevant today. A friend of mine had traveled in Israel years ago, and I asked her, "Did you see any nature spirits or anything there?" She was very a great seer of spirits. She said she saw a war goddess stationed over Tel Aviv. That was years ago. I'd say that war goddess is still there. Yeah,
Definitely, and creating the consciousness of war, keeping it
exactly.
going, keeping it alive.
Yeah, so we have to be careful of some of these beings. That, but on the whole, well, originally they were just there to protect the tribe and to guide them, guide them to, sustenance or whatever. So they were a beneficial thing. So if we did give them our energy, we would get a lot back for that. So, um,
Well,
they
as
were.
you say, it's the positive energy, isn't it? That's what we've got to channel into the world is the positive. So the spirits, the interdimensional entities, beings, whatever we call them, they follow us. It's all we are creating the collective consciousness around us, which is what we now know as the morphic field. So
Yes.
we can change this. We can shift the consciousness into a different wave pattern, a different reality, if you like, and bring the positive back in. And in fact, this is what the shift in consciousness is at this moment in time. And it's what I see happening. Your book will do the same thing. My books will do the same thing. We're shifting it back to how it should have been before the flipping church came in, and they understood about consciousness and wave patterns. They understood how to hijack that and bring it into their own agenda. And now it's up to us as a human species to bring it back
Yeah.
into what it was originally.
Yes. So I've got a lot of work in this new book to try and, in a simple way, deconstruct so much mythology in Ireland, because there is more than enough. There's buckets full of it that was written by medieval monks, but a lot of it was propaganda to glorify their own church, Church of Armagh, for one, and sideline the other churches. They're all the monasteries would be fighting against each other, and there was a lot of corruption and everything. You could say that the whole monastic system back then, 1500 years ago, was really just another form of the hierarchy ruling the people, because it was all like hereditary positions, and they had children, the abbots of the monasteries, and they became power centers, and there was no towns before they were there, so they became the administrative centers, and they ran everything. And it's hard to believe still that they dominate education, because you have to think, well, what's religion got to do with education? But they still do in Ireland, which is, I find, very strange, because I was brought up with no religion, and most people in Australia are not interested in religion. I'd say it's done its day there, but here it's still. It was, unfortunately, it stepped in after the British left and took control of a state in chaos that had no education system. So they said, "Oh, we'll do that," and and they still dominate it today.
They've got way too much power, way too much money, and they don't want to let that go. Again, nothing to do with God. You see, everything that they stand for has nothing to do with love, compassion,
No.
beauty, positivity, all the things that God is supposed to stand for. The church has got nothing to do with that.
Nothing to do with. Whereas the Old Testament God was a mixture of several gods. The Israeli thunder god, Yahweh, he was part of the picture. And these were very cranky, punishing, angry gods. The loving one came in. I think he might have been made up, that one, but it
I,
started off
I,
with the cranky one.
yeah, I think Yahweh is probably an extraterrestrial being actually that was parading around as a god. Um, and I think the Bible, certainly the biblical texts, they stem from the Sumerian texts, the tablets, and you can see it's all the same stories. Certainly in the Old Testament,
Okay.
and it's a very, the book covers essentially what is, sort of child sacrifice, killing people because he just feels like it that day.
Yeah, because people haven't got the same ideas as you. It's okay to kill them.
Yeah, but
Drama.
essentially, yeah, I think what all those stories are is they're historical texts, and I suspect that they were advanced beings,
Uh,
extraterrestrial advanced beings who were on this earth.
hmm.
But anyway, that's a story for a different day. We're talking about
Yes,
fairies today.
it's very hard to find evidence or concrete proof. You could say.
I know there isn't, but we all have to make our life what it is,
We
follow
have
our
to, yeah,
passions.
create our own reality. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. Okay, and on that note, because we've been talking for well over an hour, I think we'll call it a day today. And
Okay.
maybe when you've done your next book, you can come back on and we can discuss that because that sounds absolutely fascinating as well.
Thank you. No, it's been
Yeah.
lovely to talk, Ruth, and it's always great to meet like-minded souls and to discuss these things that are very positive.
Yeah, yeah, likewise. Okay, well, thanks very much. And all right, so say goodbye. Okay,
Bye.
bye. Catch up with you soon. Bye.